"I never thought I'd be saying this to you, of all people," she whispered, her eyes never leaving his. "But yes, the baby is yours, and no, I'm not keeping it." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft ticking of the clock on his wall and the distant laughter of his 5-year-old daughter playing in the backyard, blissfully unaware that her entire world was about to change forever. "If you're feeling that knot in your stomach already, stick with me until the end. I promise this story takes turns you won't see coming." Hit that like button if you've ever had a moment that completely altered the course of your life, and subscribe to catch more stories that explore the complicated, messy, beautiful reality of modern relationships. Marcus Reid never planned on being a single father. At 34, he had finally found his rhythm, balancing his work as an architectural engineer with raising his daughter Lily after her mother walked out when she was just 6 months old. His life was structured, predictable, and while not perfect, it was stable. The last person he expected to disrupt that stability was Eliza Chen, the quiet, brilliant landscape architect his firm had brought in for their latest sustainable housing project. Their first meeting had been strictly professional. Marcus had been impressed by her innovative designs that seamlessly integrated natural elements into urban spaces. Eliza had respected his practical approach to structural challenges. They worked well together, their different perspectives creating something neither could have achieved alone. The attraction had been there from the beginning, but both had ignored it, focusing instead on the project that was quickly becoming the highlight of both their careers. It wasn't until the night of the project's approval that everything changed. The team had gone out to celebrate, and as the night wore on, people gradually left until only Marcus and Eliza remained, talking about everything from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. He told her about Lily, about the struggle and the joy of raising her alone. She shared her passion for creating spaces where nature and human design could coexist, and her fear that at 32, she might have chosen her career over the family she'd always wanted. "I should get home to Lily," Marcus had said finally, reluctantly. "My sister's watching her, but she has work tomorrow." "I'll walk out with you," Eliza had replied, gathering her coat. The night air had been cool, the streets quiet. They'd stood beside his car, neither wanting to say goodbye. When he finally leaned in to kiss her, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. One kiss led to another, and another, until they were breathless, laughing softly against each other's lips. "Come home with me," he'd whispered, surprising himself. She'd hesitated only a moment before nodding. Yes. That night had been perfect, tender, passionate, honest. In the morning, they'd shared coffee and shy smiles before he had to leave to pick up Lily. They'd agreed to take things slow, to see where this might go without rushing or making promises neither was sure they could keep. But then Eliza had disappeared. 2 weeks after their night together, she stopped coming to the office. His calls went straight to voicemail. The firm said she'd taken a leave of absence for personal reasons. Marcus had been confused, hurt, and eventually angry. Had he misread everything? Had their connection meant nothing to her? 3 months passed with no word. The project continued without her, though it felt hollow to Marcus now. He threw himself into his work and into being the best father he could be to Lily, who had recently started kindergarten and was bringing home artwork and stories every day that made his heart swell with pride. Then, on a rainy Tuesday evening as he was making dinner while Lily colored at the kitchen table, his doorbell rang. When he opened it, Eliza stood there, soaked from the rain, her face pale and drawn. "Can I come in?" she'd asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. He'd stepped aside wordlessly, his heart pounding. She'd looked different, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, but still beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. "Daddy, who is it?" Lily had called from the kitchen. "Just a friend from work, sweetheart. Keep coloring, I'll be right back." He'd led Eliza to the living room, maintaining a careful distance between them. "Where have you been?" he'd asked, unable to keep the hurt from his voice. "I needed time to think," she'd replied, twisting her hands together. "To figure out what to do." "About what?" You just disappeared, Eliza. No explanation, nothing. She'd taken a deep breath, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. I'm pregnant, Marcus. The world had seemed to stop. He'd stared at her, unable to process her words. You're, what? Pregnant. Almost 4 months now. And it's mine? He'd asked, his voice strangled. That's when she'd said those words that would change everything. Yes, the baby is yours, and no, I'm not keeping it. The silence that followed had stretched between them like an abyss. Marcus had felt like he was falling, with nothing to grab onto. What do you mean, you're not keeping it? He'd finally managed to ask. Eliza had looked down at her hands. I'm not terminating the pregnancy, if that's what you're asking. But I can't be a mother, Marcus. I'm not ready. My career is finally taking off, and I've just been offered a position with an international firm that would mean traveling constantly. I've thought about this from every angle, and I know myself well enough to know I can't give a child what it needs. So what are you saying? He'd asked, though he already knew the answer. I'm saying I want you to raise the baby. You're already an amazing father to Lily. This child would be so lucky to have you. Her voice had broken then. I know it's asking too much. I know it's not fair. But I had to tell you, to give you the choice. Marcus had run his hands through his hair, his mind racing. Another child. A baby. The responsibility, the sleepless nights, the financial strain, he'd done it once already, and it had nearly broken him. But he'd also experienced the indescribable joy, the profound love that came with being a parent. What if I say no? He'd asked quietly. Then I'll arrange for adoption, she'd replied, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. I've researched agencies that do open adoptions. The baby would go to a loving family, and you could still be part of its life if you wanted. And what about you? Would you be part of its life? She'd hesitated. I don't know. I want to say yes, but I don't want to make promises I can't keep. From the kitchen, they'd heard Lily singing to herself as she colored, oblivious to the conversation that was determining her future as much as the baby's. I need time, Marcus had said finally. This isn't just about me. It's about Lily too. Eliza had nodded, standing up. I understand. I'm staying at my parents' place in the city for now. They don't know about any of this yet. Take whatever time you need. As she'd turned to leave, Marcus had called after her. Why did you disappear? Why didn't you tell me sooner? She'd paused at the door, her back to him. Because I was afraid. Not of you, but of myself. Of what I might do if I let myself believe we could be a family. She'd looked back at him, her eyes filled with a sadness that cut him to the core. I've never wanted children, Marcus. I thought I might someday, but the truth is, I don't have what it takes to be a mother. It took me these months to accept that about myself, to stop hating myself for it. I'm sorry I left the way I did. You deserved better. After she'd gone, Marcus had stood in his hallway for a long time, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A baby. His baby. A sibling for Lily. A responsibility he hadn't asked for, with a woman who didn't want to be a mother. The next few weeks had been a blur of emotions. Anger at Eliza for disappearing, for making this decision without him. Fear of failing, of not being enough for 2 children. Grief for the relationship he'd thought they might have. And underneath it all, a growing sense of certainty about what he needed to do. He'd called her on a Sunday morning, after spending the night making lists, calculating budgets, and researching everything from childcare options to how siblings adjust to new babies. I want to raise the baby, he'd told her when she answered. But I have conditions. What conditions? She'd asked, her voice cautious. I want you to be involved, even if it's just at a distance. This child deserves to know who its mother is. And I want everything legally documented, custody, support, visitation. I need to know you won't just change your mind one day and try to take the baby away. There had been a long pause before she'd responded. I can agree to that. But I need you to understand something, Marcus. I'm not doing this because I don't care. I'm doing it because I care enough to know my limitations. They'd met the next day at a cafe, away from Lily's curious eyes and ears. Eliza had looked better than the last time he'd seen her. There was color in her cheeks, and her eyes were clearer. She'd been wearing a loose sweater that didn't quite hide the small but definite curve of her stomach. I've been seeing a therapist, she'd told him as they sat across from each other, coffee cooling between them. Trying to understand why I feel this way, why I can't be what this baby needs. And, he'd prompted when she fell silent. And I've realized it's not just about my career or my freedom. It's deeper than that. She'd taken a shaky breath. My mother was not a good parent. She suffered from severe depression, and there were times when she couldn't get out of bed for weeks. My father worked constantly to support us, so I basically raised myself and my younger brother. I've always been terrified that I inherited her depression, that I'd fail my child the way she failed us. Marcus had reached across the table then, taking her hand. It had been the first time they'd touched since that night months ago. I'm sorry, Eliza. I didn't know. She'd squeezed his hand before pulling away. How could you? We had one night together. We barely know each other. Yet here we are, having a child together. A small, sad smile had touched her lips. Life has a strange sense of humor. They'd spent the next hour discussing practical matters, doctor's appointments, the birth plan, legal arrangements. It had been surreal, planning these intimate details with someone who was essentially a stranger, yet connected to him in the most profound way possible. Have you told Lily yet? Eliza had asked as they prepared to leave. Marcus had shaken his head. Not yet. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. She's excited about starting school, making friends. I don't want to overwhelm her. She seems like an amazing little girl, from what you've told me. She is, he'd said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. She's smart, kind, curious about everything. She'll be a great big sister. Eliza had looked away then, blinking rapidly. I'm glad. That makes this easier, somehow. As they'd stood to leave, Marcus had been struck by the strangeness of their situation. This woman was carrying his child, a child she would give to him to raise, and then what? Would she disappear from their lives? Would she visit occasionally, a distant figure who shared their DNA but not their daily joys and struggles? How would he explain this to his child someday? What will we tell the baby? He'd asked suddenly. When they're old enough to understand? Eliza had considered this, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her stomach. The truth, she'd said finally. That I loved them enough to make sure they had the parent they deserved. The months that followed had been a careful dance of boundaries and preparations. Marcus had converted his home office into a nursery, painting the walls a soft green that reminded him of Eliza's eyes. He'd told Lily about the baby, explaining in simple terms that sometimes grown-ups make babies but aren't ready to be parents, and that Eliza had asked him to be the baby's daddy because she knew how good he was at it. Lily had taken the news with the straightforward acceptance of a 5-year-old. Will the baby live with us forever? She'd asked. Yes, sweetheart. The baby will be your brother or sister. And will the baby's mommy live with us too? That question had been harder to answer. No, honey. Eliza won't live with us. But she might visit sometimes. Lily had frowned, processing this. Is she like my mommy? Will she go away and never come back? The innocent question had pierced Marcus's heart. Despite his efforts to shield Lily from the pain of her mother's abandonment, she understood more than he'd realized. No, Lilybug. Eliza isn't going away forever. She's making a different choice. She knows she can't be a mommy right now, so she's making sure the baby has a daddy who loves them, just like I love you. Lily had nodded solemnly. I'll help you, Daddy. I can be a good big sister. As Eliza's pregnancy progressed, she'd kept her word about staying involved. She'd invited Marcus to doctor's appointments, shared ultrasound photos, and even agreed to meet Lily, though that first meeting had been awkward and brief. Eliza had been kind but reserved, clearly uncomfortable with the role of expectant mother. Lily, sensing her discomfort, had been uncharacteristically shy. The turning point had come at the 7-month mark. Marcus had received a call from Eliza's mother in the middle of the night. Eliza's in the hospital, she'd said, her voice tight with worry. There were complications. The doctors are concerned about preterm labor. Marcus had called his sister to stay with Lily and rushed to the hospital, his heart pounding with fear. He'd found Eliza pale and small in the hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily around her. I'm sorry, she'd whispered when she saw him. I didn't want them to call you. Don't be ridiculous, he'd said, taking the chair beside her bed. Of course I should be here. What happened? Placental abruption, she'd explained, her voice weak. It's when the placenta separates from the uterine wall. They've stopped the bleeding, but I need to stay on bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy. Bed rest? For 2 months? What about your job, your apartment? She'd looked away, tears filling her eyes. I don't know. My parents' house has stairs everywhere, and my apartment is a 5th-floor walk-up. The doctor says I need to be on strict bed rest, minimal movement. Marcus had made the offer without hesitation. Stay with us. We have a guest room on the main floor. I can work from home most days, and my sister can help when I can't. Marcus, no. That's too much. We agreed on boundaries. Forget the boundaries, he'd interrupted. This is about the baby's health. Our baby's health. The "our" had hung between them, a word they'd carefully avoided until now. Eliza had stayed in the hospital for 3 days before the doctors deemed her stable enough to leave, with strict instructions for bed rest and regular monitoring. Marcus had prepared the guest room, explaining to Lily that Eliza would be staying with them until the baby was born because both she and the baby needed special care. Those 2 months had changed everything. Forced into close quarters, unable to escape each other's company, Marcus and Eliza had begun to truly know each other beyond the superficial details they'd shared before. He'd learned that she hummed classical music when she was anxious, that she could recite poetry from memory, that she laughed in her sleep. She'd discovered his passion for old jazz records, his terrible cooking skills but excellent baking, his habit of reading history books to unwind. Most surprisingly, she'd formed a bond with Lily. At first, Lily had been wary, keeping her distance. But gradually, drawn by Eliza's gentle manner and genuine interest in her stories and drawings, she'd begun to spend time in the guest room, showing Eliza her school projects, asking questions about the baby growing in her belly. Does the baby know I'm its sister? Lily had asked one afternoon as she sat carefully on the edge of Eliza's bed. I think the baby does, Eliza had replied, taking Lily's small hand and placing it on her stomach where the baby was kicking. Feel that? I think that's the baby saying hello to you. Lily's eyes had widened in wonder. Hello, baby, she'd whispered. I'm Lily. I'm going to be your big sister. Marcus had watched from the doorway, his heart full and aching at the same time. This was what a family could look like, he'd thought. This was what he'd always wanted for Lily, for himself. But it was temporary, a fragile moment that would end when the baby was born and Eliza left. As her due date approached, Eliza had grown quieter, more withdrawn. Marcus had noticed but hadn't pushed, assuming she was preparing herself for the separation to come. He'd focused instead on practical preparations, finishing the nursery, stocking up on diapers and formula, arranging for family leave from work. The baby had come 2 weeks early, on a stormy night in April. Marcus had been awakened by Eliza calling his name from the guest room, her voice tight with pain. The drive to the hospital had been tense, the contractions coming faster than either of them had expected for a first-time mother. "Something's wrong," Eliza had gasped as another contraction hit. "It shouldn't be this fast." She'd been right. At the hospital, the doctors had discovered that the baby was in distress, its heart rate dropping with each contraction. An emergency C-section had been ordered, and Marcus had found himself being rushed into surgical scrubs, his mind blank with fear. "Stay with her," the nurse had instructed, leading him to Eliza's side in the operating room. "Keep her calm." Eliza's face had been ashen, her eyes wide with terror as the anesthesiologist prepared her for the spinal block. "Marcus," she'd whispered, reaching for his hand. "If something happens to me." "Nothing's going to happen," he'd interrupted, squeezing her hand. "You're going to be fine. The baby's going to be fine." "But if it does," she'd insisted, "I want you to know that these past months, they've meant everything to me. You and Lily, you showed me what a family could be." Before he could respond, the surgery had begun, a flurry of activity on the other side of the blue drape separating them from the lower half of Eliza's body. Marcus had held her hand, murmuring reassurances, his eyes fixed on her face, willing her to stay strong. The moment their son had been lifted from Eliza's body, tiny and blue and silent, time had seemed to stop. The room had hushed, all eyes on the motionless infant. Then, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds, a thin, angry cry had pierced the silence. "He's breathing," the doctor had announced, relief evident in her voice. "We need to get him to the NICU right away, but his vitals are stabilizing." They'd brought the baby to Eliza briefly, letting her see his face before whisking him away. "He's beautiful," she'd whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He looks like you." The next 24 hours had been a blur of fear and hope. Their son, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, with a shock of dark hair and Marcus's cleft chin, had been placed in an incubator, monitored constantly for the respiratory distress that had threatened his life in those first moments. Eliza had been moved to recovery, weak from blood loss and the trauma of surgery. Marcus had shuttled between them, torn between his newborn son fighting for every breath and the woman who had given him life at great risk to her own. He'd called his sister to explain the situation to Lily, promising to bring her to meet her brother as soon as the doctors allowed. It had been 3 days before their son was deemed stable enough to leave the NICU. 3 days of watching his tiny chest rise and fall, of learning to change diapers through the incubator ports, of reading aloud from children's books his sister had picked out for him. 3 days of visiting Eliza in her hospital room, bringing her updates and photos, watching her face light up at each piece of good news. On the 4th day, as Marcus had been preparing to take their son, now officially named Noah James Reid, home, Eliza had asked to see him one more time. "I've been thinking," she'd said as she held Noah, her finger trapped in his surprisingly strong grip. "About our arrangement." Marcus's heart had sunk. This was it, the moment she would say goodbye, would sign the papers making him Noah's sole legal guardian, would walk out of their lives except for the occasional obligatory visit. "I don't think I can do it," she'd continued, her voice breaking. "I don't think I can leave him. Or you. Or Lily." Marcus had stared at her, not daring to hope he understood her correctly. "What are you saying, Eliza?" "I'm saying I was wrong. About myself, about what I wanted, about what I could be." She'd looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears and determination. "These past months with you and Lily, and these days with Noah, they've shown me that I was letting fear make my decisions. Fear of turning into my mother, fear of failing, fear of loving someone so much that losing them would destroy me." "And now?" he'd asked, his voice barely audible. "Now I'm still afraid. Terrified, actually." A small, watery laugh had escaped her. "But I'm more afraid of missing this, of missing him growing up, of missing the chance to be a family with you and Lily. If that's still something you would want." Marcus had sat beside her on the hospital bed, carefully putting his arm around her and Noah. "Eliza, from the moment I met you, there was something. I can't explain it. And these past months, watching you with Lily, seeing how much you care even when you were convinced you couldn't be a mother. I've fallen in love with you. But I never said anything because I thought you were set on leaving." "I thought I was too," she'd admitted. "Until they put him in my arms, and I realized I'd been lying to myself. I do want this. I want to be his mother. I want to be part of Lily's life. I want to be with you, if you'll have me, even though I'm a mess and I have no idea what I'm doing." "None of us know what we're doing," Marcus had said, laughing through his own tears. "We just figure it out as we go along." They'd brought Noah home the next day, to a house where Lily waited impatiently to meet her brother. Marcus had watched as Eliza carefully placed Noah in Lily's arms, showing her how to support his head, both of them gazing in wonder at the tiny face looking up at them. "Is Eliza going to be Noah's mommy?" Lily had asked, looking between the adults with the directness only a child could manage. Marcus and Eliza had exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "Yes," Eliza had answered finally. "If that's okay with you, I'd like to be Noah's mommy. And I'd like to be part of your life too, not as your mommy, because you already had one, but as someone who cares about you very much." Lily had considered this seriously. "Can I call you Eliza Mom? Because you're Eliza and you're Noah's mom." Eliza's laugh had been watery. "Eliza Mom sounds perfect." The adjustment hadn't been easy. Eliza had moved into the guest room temporarily while they figured out their relationship, both of them agreeing that rushing things wouldn't be good for anyone, especially the children. There had been sleepless nights with a newborn, moments of doubt and fear, arguments about parenting styles and household routines. Eliza had struggled with postpartum depression, her old fears resurfacing in the hormonal chaos following birth. There had been days when she couldn't get out of bed, when she was convinced she was failing Noah, failing all of them. But unlike her own mother, she'd sought help, had let Marcus support her, had fought through the darkness instead of surrendering to it. 6 months after Noah's birth, on a warm September evening as they sat on the porch watching Lily chase fireflies in the yard, Noah sleeping peacefully in his carrier between them, Marcus had taken Eliza's hand. "Move in properly," he'd said. "Not as a guest, not temporarily. Make this your home too." She'd looked at him, at the life they'd been building day by day. "Are you sure? It's a big step." "I've never been more sure of anything," he'd replied. "We've been doing this dance for months, pretending we're just co-parents when we both know it's more than that. I love you, Eliza. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to raise these children with you. I want to build a life with you. Even though I almost gave our son away. Even though I was so certain I couldn't be a mother. Especially because of that," he'd said. "Because you were brave enough to admit your fears, to ask for help, to change your mind when you realized what you truly wanted. That's the kind of person I want to share my life with." She'd leaned over Noah's carrier to kiss him, a kiss full of promise and possibility. "Yes," she'd whispered against his lips. "Yes to all of it." A year later, they'd married in a small ceremony in their backyard, with Lily as flower girl and Noah, now walking unsteadily, as ring bearer. Eliza's parents had come, their relationship slowly healing as they witnessed the woman their daughter had become. Marcus's sister had been his best person, standing beside him as he promised to love and cherish the woman who had turned his life upside down in the most unexpected and beautiful way. "If someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be standing here today," Eliza had said in her vows, her voice steady and sure, "I would have said they were crazy. I was so convinced I knew who I was, what I wanted, what I was capable of. But life had other plans, and those plans included you, and Lily, and Noah. You showed me that family isn't something to fear, it's something to embrace, with all its messiness and uncertainty and overwhelming love. Now, as they celebrated Noah's third birthday, surrounded by friends and family, Marcus watched Eliza helping their son blow out his candles, Lily beside them, now 8 and fiercely protective of her little brother. The journey hadn't been smooth. They'd had their share of arguments and misunderstandings, of sleepless nights and difficult conversations. Eliza still struggled sometimes with the fear that she wasn't enough, that she would somehow fail their children the way her mother had failed her. But they faced those fears together, building a family on honesty and trust and the understanding that love wasn't about perfection, it was about showing up, day after day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. As if sensing his thoughts, Eliza looked up, meeting his eyes across the room. The smile she gave him was radiant, full of the quiet confidence she'd found in herself and their life together. In that smile was everything they'd been through and everything that lay ahead, the challenges and joys of raising their children, the partnership they continued to strengthen each day, the love that had begun with one night and had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. "Make a wish, Noah," Lily encouraged, helping her brother take a deep breath. Marcus caught Eliza's eye again and mouthed the words that had become their private mantra, "No regrets." She nodded, mouthing them back, "No regrets." As Noah blew out his candles with his sister's help, Marcus reflected on the strange, winding path that had led them here. From a single night of connection to a pregnancy announcement that had turned his world upside down, from Eliza's calm declaration that she couldn't be a mother to the moment she'd realized she couldn't imagine being anything else, their story had been anything but conventional. But then, he thought as he moved to join his family around the birthday cake, the best stories rarely followed a straight line. They twisted and turned, full of unexpected challenges and surprising joys. They taught you things about yourself you never knew, showed you strengths you didn't realize you had, brought you to places you never thought you'd go. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, they led you exactly where you needed to be, even when it was the last place you ever expected to find yourself. As Noah smeared cake on his face and Lily laughed, as friends and family celebrated around them, as Eliza leaned into his side and he wrapped his arm around her waist, Marcus knew with absolute certainty that this messy, imperfect, beautiful life they'd built together, was exactly where he was meant to be. And from the peaceful contentment in Eliza's eyes as she looked up at him, he knew she felt the same way. Sometimes the most unexpected turns in life led to the most beautiful destinations. Sometimes a single moment, a pregnancy announcement, a calm declaration, a decision made in fear or courage or both, could change everything. And sometimes, that change was exactly what you needed, even when you didn't know you were looking for it. If you've enjoyed this journey with Marcus and Eliza, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the complicated, beautiful reality of modern relationships and the unexpected ways we find our way to love and family. Remember that life rarely goes according to plan, but sometimes the detours lead us to exactly where we're meant to be.